Hey guys, enjoy the viewing.
The office was nearly empty, the faint hum of computers and the occasional buzz of the air conditioning the only sounds to keep me company. I had stayed late, finishing a few tasks that seemed innocuous enough. Debugging a new system, checking server logs. That's when I found it. Buried in an obscure folder deep in the company's encrypted files was a document titled Humametrics_X03. My curiosity overpowered my better judgment. I clicked on it. What opened was beyond any rational explanation. Images of people, medical procedures, and what looked disturbingly like experiments. My stomach turned as I skimmed through words like neural enhancement trials and termination protocols. The timestamps suggested these were recent. A USB drive sat in the slot next to my laptop, blinking like a tiny heartbeat. I don't even remember plugging it in, but there it was recording everything on my screen. Before I could eject it, an alert pinged. Unauthorized access detected. Panic coursed through me. My fingers scrambled to close the file, to eject the drive, to erase any evidence I had seen it. But as I fumbled, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a muffled thud, like footsteps. I turned my head. Through the glass walls of the office, I saw them. Men in black suits, wearing earpieces, moving swiftly and deliberately toward my workspace. My breath caught in my throat as they split into two teams, one heading for the main doors, the other toward the emergency exits. They were sealing off my escape. The faint blue glow of the computer reflected my wide, terrified eyes. I grabbed the USB and yanked it out, my shaking hand stuffing it into my pocket. My heart thundered in my chest as I tried to think of a way out. The elevator? No, they'd be waiting. The stairs? A trap. My only option was the window. My office sat on the 5th floor, overlooking the narrow alleyway below. I pressed my face to the glass and peered down. It wasn't far, but far enough to break an ankle or worse. Yet compared to the certainty of what awaited me if I stayed, the decision was simple. The door behind me rattled. They were here. I gritted my teeth and opened the window. Cold air hit my face, sharp and bitter. My body screamed at me to stop as I swung one leg over the edge. A voice barked from behind me. "Stop! Don't move!" I didn't listen. My adrenaline surged as I let myself fall. The impact knocked the wind out of me, pain radiating up my legs. I was alive, though, and I could still move. I stumbled to my feet, clutching the USB like it was my lifeline, and ran. The alley stretched endlessly, dark and claustrophobic. I heard voices behind me, yelling commands. A spotlight cut through the shadows, grazing my shoulder as I darted into an adjacent street. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I kept moving, driven by pure fear. When I finally stopped, it was in the basement of a coffee shop I frequented. The staff had left for the day, and I collapsed onto the cold floor. Pulling out the USB, I stared at it, knowing that whatever was on this tiny device could destroy my life or save countless others. But the question remained, what had I truly uncovered, and how far would they go to bury it? I had been at Blackthorn Academy for less than a month when the questions began piling up. The school was an architectural marvel, its Gothic spires piercing the cloudy sky, its stone walls ancient and whispering of forgotten secrets. As a scholarship student, I felt both pride and an unshakable sense of not belonging. Most of the other students came from old money, their families' legacies etched into the very stone of this place. I, on the other hand, was just grateful for the opportunity. It was late one evening when I first noticed something strange. I had been in the library, lost in a sea of dusty tomes, trying to research for an assignment. As the clock struck midnight, a group of older students entered, speaking in hushed tones. I recognized one of them, Evelyn Grayson, the school prefect. Her gaze swept the room, her expression hard and unreadable. I quickly ducked behind the nearest bookshelf. Their voices carried faintly. "The recruits need to be ready by next month," one whispered. Evelyn replied sharply, "We follow protocol. No exceptions." My pulse quickened. What recruits? What protocol? I leaned in, trying to catch more of their conversation, but they moved deeper into the library, disappearing into a section marked staff only. A faint click echoed, and then silence. I stayed hidden until I was certain they were gone, then ventured toward the staff-only section. The door was locked, but the faint hum of machinery came from behind it. Something was happening in there, something that didn't belong in a school. The next few days passed uneventfully, though my mind refused to let go of what I had heard. Then came the van. It appeared one rainy afternoon, idling near the gates as students returned from class. The windows were dark, its license plate covered in mud. No one else seemed to notice it, or if they did, they said nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the library incident in my mind. Evelyn's sharp tone, the cryptic words. I decided to go for a walk, hoping the cool air would clear my head. The campus was eerily quiet, the pathways slick with rain. As I passed the main building, I saw it. The van was parked near the east wing, its engine silent. I crept closer, staying in the shadows. The doors of the van were slightly ajar, and I could see movement inside. Two figures were unloading something. No, someone, a student. Their limp form was carried into the building, the faint sound of footsteps echoing against the stone. The next day, the school felt off. Students whispered in the hallways, glancing nervously over their shoulders. Evelyn seemed more on edge than usual, her eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk. I couldn't shake the feeling that the student I had seen the night before hadn't returned to their dorm. In the cafeteria, I sat with a group of first years, trying to appear casual. "Hey, did anyone notice the van yesterday?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Silence. Then one of them, a boy named Daniel, leaned in. "You shouldn't ask about that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just stay out of it, okay?" I didn't listen. That evening, I waited until curfew and slipped out of my dorm, heading back to the staff-only section of the library. This time, I came prepared, a hairpin I had bent into a makeshift lockpick. The lock resisted at first, but after a few minutes, it clicked open. The room beyond was dimly lit, rows of filing cabinets and shelves stretching into the shadows. At the far end, a staircase descended into what looked like a basement. I hesitated, the weight of my actions pressing down on me, but curiosity won. The air grew colder as I descended, the faint hum of machinery growing louder. When I reached the bottom, I froze. The room was filled with monitors, each one displaying live feeds from around the school. Students in classrooms, in their dorms, even in the bathrooms. Every inch of the academy was under surveillance. And then I saw it, a file labeled with my name. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside were photographs, medical records, psychological evaluations. They knew everything about me, things I had never told anyone. And at the bottom, a single line, candidate status, pending. Footsteps sounded above me. Someone was coming. I grabbed the file and bolted up the stairs, barely making it out before the door creaked open behind me. I didn't stop running until I was back in my dorm, heart pounding, the file clutched to my chest. The next morning, Evelyn stopped me in the hall. Her smile was sharp, her eyes cold. "Be careful where you wander," she said softly, her voice laced with menace. "Some places are off limits for a reason." I nodded, my mouth dry. As she walked away, I knew one thing for certain. Blackthorn Academy wasn't a school. It was something much darker. Driving night shifts for the city rideshare app was supposed to be an easy gig. Quiet streets, fewer distractions, and decent tips from late-night partiers too drunk to notice if I took the scenic route. I liked the solitude, the hum of the car engine, the glow of streetlights, and the way the city seemed to exhale when most people were asleep. That night started like any other. A light drizzle blurred the windshield as I cruised downtown, the app pinging sporadically with pickups. Around 1 a.m., I accepted a ride request from someone named Alex. No profile picture, just the location, a convenience store parking lot on the edge of the city. When I arrived, the lot was nearly empty, just a flickering street lamp casting long, jittery shadows. A figure stood near the curb, had pulled up against the rain. They didn't move as I pulled up. I rolled down the window slightly. "Alex," I called. The figure nodded and slid into the back seat without a word. They were soaked, the smell of damp fabric filling the car. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the hood obscured most of their face. Their hands rested stiffly on their knees, pale and motionless. Something about their stillness made my stomach tighten, but I brushed it off. "Where to?" I asked, keeping my voice even. They hesitated before replying, their voice soft but toneless. "Just drive." I hesitated. Who doesn't give a destination? The app required one, but when I glanced at my phone, the location field was blank. I should have pressed for details, but something about their presence made confrontation feel unwise. So, I started driving, heading toward the city center, hoping they'd eventually speak up. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic swipe of the windshield wipers. I stole a glance in the mirror. They were sitting unnaturally upright, their face angled down as if studying their hands. They hadn't moved once since getting in. After a few blocks, I tried again. "Look, I need to know where you're going. I can't just drive around all night." They lifted their heads slightly, and for the first time, I saw their eyes, dark, hollow, like they hadn't slept in weeks. Their gaze met mine in the mirror, and I felt a jolt of unease, like I just looked into something I wasn't supposed to see. "Just keep going," they murmured, their lips barely moving. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing. Every instinct screamed at me to end the ride, to pull over and tell them to get out. But I didn't. Instead, I turned onto a busier street, hoping the presence of other cars and lights would ease the tension. It didn't. The rain intensified, hammering against the roof, drowning out the faint sounds of the city. We passed a gas station, its neon sign casting fleeting colors across the car interior. I glanced back again, but the passenger's hood had slipped slightly, revealing a thin, pale face. Their lips were cracked, as though they hadn't spoken or drunk water in days. Then, they spoke again, their voice cutting through the rain like a knife. "Do you ever wonder if someone's following you?" My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" Their head tilted, and they smiled faintly. It wasn't a friendly smile. Sometimes, when you're driving, doesn't it feel like the same car's been behind you a little too long? I glanced in the rearview mirror, suddenly hyper-aware of the cars behind me. There was a black sedan a few car lengths back, its headlights piercing through the rain. I tried to shake off the unease. Coincidence, I told myself. This was a city. Cars were bound to take the same routes. But then, the passenger leaned forward slightly, their voice dropping to a whisper. "It's been following us since we left." I stiffened. Had it? My heart hammered as I turned onto a side street, the sedan doing the same. A sharp left, so did they. Panic surged. Is this some kind of joke? I snapped, my voice trembling. The passenger didn't answer. They leaned back again, melting into the shadows of the back seat, their face obscured once more. "You shouldn't have picked me up," they murmured almost to themselves. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly in the wet street. "Get out!" I barked, twisting in my seat to face them. But the back seat was empty. My heart stopped. The door hadn't opened. The seatbelt was still buckled, hanging limply. I was alone. I sat there, frozen, the rain pounding against the windows. Then a soft knock on the driver's side window made me jump. I turned sharply, expecting to see the passenger, or something worse. Instead, it was a man, soaked and out of breath. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, his voice muffled by the glass. "Your car's just sitting in the middle of the road." I stared at him, my mind reeling. I turned to look in the back seat again. Still empty. No sign anyone had been there. I fumbled for words, finally managing to stammer. Yeah, I'm fine." The sound of shattering glass jolted me awake. For a moment, I thought it was a dream, the remnants of some late-night paranoia blending with reality. But then I heard voices, low, urgent whispers, followed by the heavy thud of boots against the hardwood floor. Someone was inside the house. I rolled out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest, and reached for my phone. It wasn't on the nightstand where I usually kept it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd left it downstairs. My wife, Caroline, was still asleep beside me, her breath steady and oblivious. "Stay here," I whispered, shaking her awake just enough to keep her still, but not enough to panic her. Her eyes fluttered, confused, but she nodded groggily. Creeping to the bedroom door, I cracked it open, peering into the hallway. The glow of a flashlight flickered against the wall. Two voices spoke in hushed tones. One was gravelly and commanding, the other nervous, almost shaky. "Check the study," the first man barked. "No cash up here," the second replied, his voice tight with tension. "A robbery." My mind reeled. Why us? We weren't wealthy, not by any stretch. A modest two-story home in the suburbs didn't exactly scream target. But these men didn't seem like amateurs. Their movements were deliberate, their coordination practiced. I slipped back into the bedroom, scanning for anything I could use as a weapon. The best I could find was a heavy lamp on the dresser. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As I gripped the base, the sound of footsteps grew louder, heading toward the stairs. My chest tightened. They were coming up. The whispers grew clearer. "I'll take the bedrooms," the gravelly voice said. "You check the basement." "No way, man," the second guy snapped, his tone breaking. "I'm not going down there." "Fine," the first growled. "Just keep looking." They were splitting up. My mind raced. If one of them came into the bedroom, I'd have to act. I tightened my grip on the lamp and positioned myself behind the door. Every second stretched into an eternity. I could hear my own heartbeat, a thunderous drum in the silence. Then the door creaked open. A tall figure stepped inside, his flashlight beam sweeping across the room. His back was to me. I could see the outline of a weapon in his waistband. My breath hitched, and I held the lamp above my head, ready to swing. But he didn't turn. He scanned the room quickly, muttering, "Empty," before backing out and closing the door again. I exhaled shakily and set the lamp down. The faint glow of their flashlights moved toward the study at the end of the hall. I took the chance to edge the bedroom door open wider, my pulse pounding. I needed to get downstairs to grab my phone or at least find a way to call for help. But as I stepped into the hall, I heard something that stopped me cold. "Where's the safe, Eric?" the gravelly voice demanded, loud enough now to echo through the house. I froze. They knew my name. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't random. They weren't here by accident. I crept to the top of the stairs, straining to hear their conversation. "You said he'd crack by now," the second man said, his voice quivering. "He will. Everyone's got a breaking point." Break? What were they talking about? My stomach churned. It was a robbery, or so I'd thought. But this was starting to feel like something much worse. I inched closer, my bare feet silent against the floorboards. I caught a glimpse of them in the living room. The taller one, gravelly voice, was pacing, his gloved hands clenched into fists. The shorter one stood by the fireplace, rummaging through a stack of papers. "You think he told his wife?" the shorter one asked nervously. "Doesn't matter," the tall one replied, his tone icy. "We'll get what we came for." I swallowed hard. Told her what? What could they possibly want from me? And then it clicked. The safe. It was hidden behind a loose panel in the study. A safe I hadn't touched in years. When my father passed, he left me an old set of documents, something about company finances and offshore accounts. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but he'd always been cryptic about his business dealings. I had buried it in the safe, forgotten until now. These men weren't here for cash or jewelry. They were here for that. I couldn't let them find it. My legs trembled as I backed away from the stairs. I returned to the bedroom, where Caroline was now sitting up, her eyes wide with fear. "What's going on?" she whispered. "No time to explain," I said, grabbing her hand. "We need to get out." We moved toward the window, my mind racing. The drop to the backyard wasn't far, but the bushes below would make it painful. As I slid the window open, the bedroom door burst inward. "Going somewhere?" the tall man sneered, his flashlight blinding me. I froze, shielding Caroline behind me. "I don't know what you want," I stammered, "but take whatever you want and leave." The man stepped closer, his partner behind him. "Oh, we're taking it," he said. "But not before you tell us the combination." My grip on the windowsill tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." The shorter man shifted nervously, his eyes darting to the hallway. "We should go," he muttered. But the tall man wasn't done. He stepped closer, pulling the weapon from his waistband. "One last chance, Eric. Open the safe, or—" A sudden flash of red and blue lights flooded the room. The shorter man bolted, cursing under his breath, but the tall one hesitated, his glare burning into me. Then he turned and ran, leaving the weapon behind. Caroline sobbed quietly as I pulled her close, the sound of sirens growing louder. The police had arrived, likely tipped off by a neighbor who'd heard the commotion. But even as the officers swept the house and assured us we were safe, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. They hadn't come for cash or valuables. They came for secrets. Secrets I wasn't sure I even wanted to uncover. But now, it seemed I didn't have a choice. The air smelled of decay and rain as we arrived at the Hawthorne estate. It loomed ahead, its once pristine stone walls covered in vines and mildew. My boss, Mr. Garvey, sent us, 3 interns fresh out of law school, to catalog the belongings of Victor Hawthorne, a reclusive billionaire who had vanished 2 years ago. His property, locked in endless litigation, needed to be assessed before it could be sold. None of us wanted to be here. The stormy weather and the sheer isolation of the estate, tucked deep in the woods, made it feel like a punishment. "This place is straight out of a horror movie," muttered Lauren, brushing her auburn hair behind her ear as she squinted at the cracked windows. "We'll be in and out," I said, feigning confidence. But as I pushed open the heavy wooden doors, the creak echoed in the cavernous foyer, and a chill swept through me. The inside was worse than I had imagined. Dust covered every surface, cobwebs hung like veils in the corners, and the air was thick with dampness. The grand staircase dominated the room, leading to an upper floor that disappeared into darkness. Paintings of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow us. I flipped open the inventory list. "Let's split up. The faster we finish, the faster we're out of here." Lauren scoffed, but Greg, the quietest of us, nodded. He headed toward the study, Lauren took the dining hall, and I made my way to the parlor. The silence of the house swallowed the sound of our footsteps. The parlor was opulent but decayed. A grand piano sat in one corner, its keys warped from moisture. An ornate mirror above the fireplace reflected the dim light of my flashlight, casting warped, eerie shapes. I began documenting items, the monotony of the task dulling my unease, until I noticed something odd. There was a pile of photographs stacked neatly on a side table. Each showed a different person, taken from far away as if through a telephoto lens. One was a woman walking her dog, another a man drinking coffee on his porch. The people were ordinary, their expressions candid. I flipped through the stack faster, my stomach tightening as realization set in. The dates scrawled on the back of the photos were recent. Far too recent for someone who had been missing for 2 years. A loud crash from the dining hall made me jump. I dropped the photos and ran toward the sound, finding Lauren standing over a shattered vase. "Damn thing slipped off the table," she muttered, clearly startled. "What is it about this place that feels wrong?" I hesitated, debating whether to tell her about the photos, but something stopped me. "Just keep your flashlight steady," I said instead, before heading back to the foyer. Greg emerged from the study, his face pale. "You guys need to see this." We followed him to the study, where he pointed to a wall partially hidden behind a bookshelf. Dozens of monitors were mounted there, their screens black. The wires snaked into the floor, leading somewhere below the house. A thick layer of dust suggested they hadn't been touched in years, but Greg's flashlight beam revealed smudged fingerprints on one of the screens. Lauren leaned closer. Was he watching people? Maybe it's security footage, I offered, though the words felt hollow. Greg shook his head. "There are no cameras outside. These are for inside the house." A thud echoed from somewhere above us, cutting the air like a knife. We froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances. "Probably just the wind," I said, though I didn't believe it. The storm outside had calmed, and the house was unnervingly still. "Let's just finish up and get out of here," Lauren whispered, her voice trembling. We worked faster now, our flashlights darting through rooms like searchlights. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling that we weren't alone, but it grew stronger with every step. In the master bedroom, I found more photos, these ones pinned to the wall. The same people, the same candid angles, but now with scribbled notes beneath each one. Routine. Morning jog, 7 a.m. Starbucks, 8:15. "Guys!" Lauren's voice cut through the silence. I ran back to the foyer, finding her standing by the grand staircase, pointing at something in the dust. Footprints. They weren't ours. The prints were deep, leading from the front door to the staircase and disappearing into the second floor. "Who else is here?" she whispered, clutching my arm. Before I could answer, the sound of a door creaking upstairs froze us in place. Greg backed toward the front door. "We should go." I agreed, but something gnawed at me. The safe in the study. Hawthorne's files. If we left now, we might miss the answers to why this place felt so alive in its silence. "Go start the car," I said. "I'll grab the inventory list." Back in the study, I yanked the drawer of the desk open, searching for anything that might explain Hawthorne's obsessions. Beneath a stack of receipts was a key, small and rusted. I didn't have time to guess what it opened. The sound of footsteps echoed again, this time closer. I slammed the drawer shut, my breath quickening. As I turned to leave, I saw it. A shadow moved in the reflection of the window. It wasn't mine. I sprinted back to the foyer, where Lauren and Greg were already outside, waving frantically for me to hurry. Behind them, the car's headlights flickered in the rain. My chest heaved as I ran, throwing myself into the back seat. "Drive!" Lauren screamed at Greg, and he floored the gas. Through the rear window, the house loomed dark and silent. But just before we rounded the bend, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the flickering lights inside. It didn't move. It just watched, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it knew I had the key. The trail was wet from the morning's mist, the ground soft beneath my boots as I followed the group deeper into the wilderness. It was supposed to be a simple guided hike, a tourist-friendly route through the Pine Valley Mountains. I had signed up on a whim, eager for a change of scenery after a week spent staring at spreadsheets. The guide, a wiry man named Ethan with a bright red jacket, promised stunning views and a day to remember. He wasn't wrong. There were 8 of us in total, strangers brought together by nothing more than an online booking. We started as a pack, polite but reserved. Ethan led us confidently, his voice carrying above the rustle of leaves as he pointed out landmarks and spouted bits of local lore. The first hour passed uneventfully. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that wavered with the breeze. I kept to the middle of the group, listening as a couple behind me whispered about their honeymoon plans. Ahead, a father and daughter laughed about the girls' clumsy footing. It felt normal, relaxing even. That feeling didn't last. We stopped for a break at a rocky overlook. Ethan handed out bottles of water, his voice as chipper as ever. "Drink up. It's easy to forget to hydrate out here." I sat on a boulder, letting the cool breeze dry the sweat on my back. When we set off again, the group felt smaller somehow. I did a quick count, 7. I hadn't noticed anyone leave, and I couldn't place who was missing. Maybe someone had turned back? I thought about asking Ethan, but his pace quickened, and I found myself struggling to keep up. The trail narrowed, the trees pressing in closer. The cheerful chatter of before faded into uneasy silence. I glanced back, expecting to see the couple or the father and daughter, but the path behind me was empty. The realization hit me like a gut punch. Only 3 of us remained. "Where's everyone else?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Ethan turned, his expression calm, but unreadable. "They must have fallen behind," he said with a shrug. "They'll catch up." But they didn't. The hours stretched on, the forest growing darker as the sun dipped below the peaks. The father and daughter were gone now, leaving just me and an older woman named Claire. She clutched her walking stick tightly, her knuckles white. "This doesn't feel right," she muttered as we paused at a fork in the trail. Her eyes darted nervously between the paths. "We should head back." Ethan smiled, too wide for the situation. "It's just a bit farther. You'll regret missing the view." The words felt wrong, rehearsed. I wanted to demand answers, to know why he wasn't concerned about the others. But my throat tightened, and I couldn't bring myself to speak. Instead, I followed him, every step heavier than the last. We reached a clearing as the last sliver of daylight faded. The ground here was disturbed, the earth churned like something, or someone, had been dragged through it. My stomach churned as I spotted a backpack half buried in the dirt. I recognized it, bright yellow with a stitched-on patch. It belonged to the teenage girl. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "What the hell is going on?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he took a slow step toward me, his red jacket bright against the gloom. Claire backed away, her walking stick trembling in her grip. "You knew," she whispered, her voice thick with dread. "You knew this would happen." He smiled again, that same unnatural grin, and I knew we were in trouble. Claire bolted, her footsteps crunching loudly as she disappeared into the trees. I turned to follow, but Ethan grabbed my arm, his fingers like a vice. "You're better off staying," he said, his voice disturbingly calm. "You'll only get lost." Panic surged through me, and I yanked free, stumbling backward. His smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw something behind his eyes. Annoyance? Anger? I didn't wait to find out. I ran, the trees blurring as I barreled into the forest. The air felt heavier here, suffocating, and the ground sloped unpredictably. Every step sent me sliding, my boots scraping against roots and rocks. Somewhere behind me, I heard Ethan's voice calling out, eerily steady. "Come back. You'll hurt yourself." I didn't stop. My lungs burned, my legs trembling as I pushed forward. The sound of my own breath drowned out everything else until I tripped, landing hard on the wet earth. The impact jarred my vision, and I struggled to right myself. When I finally did, I realized something horrifying. I was back in the clearing. The backpack was still there, its patch glinting faintly in the moonlight. I staggered backward, my heart hammering in my chest. The trail I had taken gone. The trees now stood densely packed, an impenetrable wall. "Lost!" Ethan's voice came from the shadows, soft and mocking. He stepped into the clearing, his jacket somehow pristine despite the mud. "I told you. Where are they?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "What did you do to them?" He tilted his head, almost amused. "They left, just like you tried to. But no one leaves." I turned to run again, but the forest closed in tighter, the air pressing against me like a living thing. Ethan stood still, his figure blending into the night until all I could see was the faint red of his jacket. By the time the search party found me the next morning, I was alone. No sign of the others. No sign of Ethan. Just me, clutching the yellow backpack like a lifeline, its patch worn smooth under my shaking fingers. The authorities called it disorientation, a tragic accident in the wilderness. But they didn't see the clearing. They didn't hear his voice. The campaign office buzzed with quiet urgency, even at midnight. Red, white, and blue banners draped the walls, a cheerful mask over the long hours and growing tensions. I sat hunched over my laptop, reviewing the candidates' upcoming debate notes for the 100th time. A fresh pot of coffee bubbled in the corner. It smelled sharp and uninviting at this hour. I was the last in turn left, but I didn't mind. The quiet helped me focus, or it should have. Tonight, though, I couldn't shake a prickling unease, as if someone were standing just out of sight, watching. The sensation followed me from the copy room to my desk, no matter how often I glanced over my shoulder. It started earlier in the evening. An email had landed in my inbox with no sender and no subject line. At first, I thought it was spam, but the message was brief and unervingly specific. "The target is tonight, midnight." I stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of it. The target? Was it a joke? A phishing attempt? I glanced around the office, but no one else seemed concerned. My supervisor had left hours ago, the other interns shortly after. Only me and a skeleton crew of security remained. I deleted the email, hoping to forget it, but the unease lingered, and now, with the clock approaching midnight, it was worse. I kept checking the wall clock, my eyes flicking back to the corner where my bag sat, containing my phone. The room felt warmer than it should, the air oppressive. Then the main door opened. I jumped, my heart racing, but it was only Luke, one of the senior campaign staff. He gave me a thin smile, the kind you give when you don't want to explain why you're here so late. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked, strolling to the conference table. He dropped a leather folder onto the surface, its contents spilling slightly, documents mostly. But the edge of a glossy photo peeked out, and I couldn't stop my eyes from darting toward it. "What are you working on?" I asked, forcing my tone to stay casual. "Logistics," he said vaguely, flipping the folder closed. "Nothing you need to worry about." I returned to my laptop, pretending to type, but my focus was shot. Luke didn't sit or leave. Instead, he moved to the coffee pot, pouring himself a cup he didn't drink. The way he stood there, staring at nothing, sent a fresh wave of anxiety down my spine. Then my laptop screen flickered. The email had returned. Same message. Same ominous words. I glanced at Luke, but his back was still to me. My fingers hovered over the keys. I wanted to tell someone, but what could I even say? That I was spooked by an anonymous email? That Luke's presence felt wrong? A soft beep broke the silence. Luke's phone lit up on the table, its screen glowing faintly. He walked over and checked it, his face briefly illuminated by the pale light. His expression didn't change, but he grabbed the folder and tucked it under his arm. "I'll be back in a bit," he said, his voice tight. He left without another word, the doors swinging shut behind him. As soon as he was gone, I moved to the table, heart pounding. I hesitated for only a moment before opening the folder. The photo caught my attention first, a clear image of our candidate, shaking hands with a supporter. Below it, a typed itinerary detailed her schedule for the next day. But the last entry was circled in red ink. Town Hall, 11:30 p.m. Below the itinerary was another email printout. My stomach twisted as I read it. "Ensure everything is in place. The press can know. The target will be there." I didn't have time to process it before the lights in the office dimmed, flickering briefly before stabilizing. My first instinct was to blame the storm outside. It had been raining for hours, but something felt deliberate about the timing. I grabbed my phone from my bag and texted my supervisor. "Hey, do you know why Luke's here so late? Something feels off." The message showed as sent, but not delivered. The air felt heavier now, the room darker than it should have been. I packed my things quickly, shoving my laptop into my bag. I had to leave. Whatever was happening here wasn't normal, and I didn't want to be part of it. As I reached the door, I heard voices from the hall. Luke's voice, calm, measured, and another I didn't recognize. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. "It's risky," the second voice said. "If the timing's wrong." "It won't be," Luke interrupted. "We've accounted for everything. Just follow the plan." I backed away from the door, my breathing shallow. The only other exit was through the back, past the break room. I moved quickly, but quietly, keeping my steps light. The rain outside pounded against the windows, masking the sound of my movements. I reached the break room and slipped out through the side door, my heart hammering. The parking lot was empty except for Luke's car and an unmarked van I hadn't noticed earlier. I climbed into my car, locking the doors as soon as I was inside. My hands trembled as I started the engine. I needed to warn someone, our candidate, the campaign manager, anyone. But as I pulled out of the lot, a shadow moved in the rearview mirror. The van's headlights blinked on. It followed me, keeping a careful distance as I turned onto the highway. My pulse raced, my thoughts jumbled. I couldn't go home. They'd find me there. But I couldn't go to the police, not without proof. My only choice was to stay on the move and hope they gave up. The van stayed with me for miles, its presence like a shadow I couldn't escape. When it finally turned off onto a side road, I felt no relief, only dread. The underground parking garage was stifling, a claustrophobic maze of concrete and shadows. The hum of the black SUV's engine echoed, its headlights casting long, jagged beams across the slick floor. I tightened my grip on the radio in my left hand, the pistol in my right feeling heavier than it should. The hostage stood trembling a few feet ahead, a man in his late 30s, sweat dripping down his temple as the barrel of a revolver pressed against his temple. "Put the gun down, officer," the man holding him growled. His voice was calm, eerily so, as though this were just another Tuesday for him. He was tall, his face half hidden behind a ski mask, but his movements were deliberate, assured. This wasn't his first time in a standoff. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. This was my first field negotiation. I was supposed to be observing, learning from the veterans, not standing here alone with a life hanging in the balance. The training scenarios hadn't prepared me for the choking tension, the realness of someone's life teetering on the edge of violence. "Let him go, and we'll talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The man chuckled, a low, dry sound. "You're not in a position to bargain, rookie. I want my brother released, and I want him released now. No delays, no tricks. You have 5 minutes before I paint this floor red." I felt the blood drain from my face. His brother was in custody, arrested during a botched armed robbery 2 days ago. The department had refused to negotiate with the gang. Yet here I was, stalling for time, my earpiece crackling faintly as the senior officer's voice came through. "Stay calm, Daniels. Keep him talking." SWAT's moving into position. I focused on the hostage's eyes, trying to project some kind of reassurance. The man's knees buckled slightly as the barrel pressed harder against his temple. "This isn't the way to fix things," I said, my voice lowering. "You hurt him, and it's over for you. There's no going back from that." The man tilted his head, considering me. "You think I care about going back? You think I haven't already crossed that line?" His tone turned sharp, anger bleeding through the cracks in his composure. "Your people shot my brother in the back like a dog, and you're telling me about lines?" A bead of sweat trickled down my neck. I couldn't afford to let the conversation veer out of control. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice steadying as I tried a new tack. "Doesn't matter. It does to me," I pressed. "You're not just some masked man in a garage. You're someone trying to save his family." "I get that." He hesitated, his grip on the hostage slackening just slightly. "Name's Paul." I nodded slowly, my mind scrambling for a connection to ground him. "Paul, your brother's still alive. He's hurt, but he's stable. Killing him won't help your case, but letting this man go might." His eyes darted to the SUV, then back to me. I could see the conflict warring in his gaze. He wasn't a man without reason, but desperation made people unpredictable. A clatter of metal echoed in the distance. Paul jerked, his grip tightening. "What was that?" he barked, dragging the hostage a step closer to the SUV. I cursed under my breath. SWAT was closing in, their movements betraying their presence. "It's nothing," I said quickly. "Just the garage settling. Stay focused on me." "You're lying," he hissed, the barrel now pressing hard enough to leave a mark on the hostage's temple. "Tell them to back off. Tell them, or I swear." "Paul, listen to me," I interrupted, raising both hands in a placating gesture. "They don't want this to end badly any more than you do, but you have to give me something to work with. Let the hostage go, and we'll figure this out." For a moment, he seemed to consider it. His fingers twitched, his breathing uneven. The hostage whimpered, the sound breaking the fragile tension. And then Paul's mask slipped, just enough to reveal a glimpse of his face. Sharp lines, hollow cheeks. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw it. A mix of anger, fear, and something darker. "Resolve. No deals," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "No trust." Before I could react, Paul yanked the hostage back toward the SUV, his movements frantic. The hostage tripped, falling to his knees. I saw my opening and didn't think. The pistol came up, the weight of it alien in my hands. "Drop it," I shouted, my voice cracking through the garage. Paul turned, and for a heartbeat, everything froze. It was the longest second of my life, the silence so thick it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Then, a single crack shattered the stillness. Paul's revolver clattered to the ground, his arm jerking back as a red stain blossomed on his sleeve. He crumpled, the hostage scrambling away. SWAT flooded the space, their movements a blur of black and shouts. I stood there, the gun shaking in my hand, as the scene unfolded around me. Paul was cuffed and hauled away, his expression blank, as though all the fight had drained out of him. The hostage was whisked off to safety, his thanks barely registering. My hands were numb, my ears ringing as adrenaline ebbed, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. Later, back at the precinct, the senior officer clapped me on the shoulder. "Good work, Daniels. You kept him from doing something stupid. But I couldn't shake Paul's face from my mind. The raw desperation, the broken resolve. He was a man who had already lost, and tonight so had I. The parking garage was colder than I expected, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you regret not wearing an extra layer. My rookie badge fell heavy on my chest as I stood behind a concrete pillar, trying to steady my breath. Across the garage, under a dim, flickering light, a man held a young woman by the arm, a pistol pressed against her temple. "Where's my son?" the man growled, his voice bouncing off the concrete walls. His face was weathered, lined with a mix of fury and desperation. "Mr. Vaughn," I called out, stepping slightly into the open, keeping my hands raised. "He's safe, but we need proof she's unharmed before we can proceed." He twisted the girl toward me. Her mascara was smeared, her cheeks streaked with tears. "Satisfied?" he spat. "Now bring him here." I hesitated, glancing at the unmarked car a few rows back. The negotiator was supposed to handle this, but Vaughn had refused to speak to anyone else. He demanded me by name, a rookie barely 3 weeks into the job. Why me? What did I have to do with this man or his son? "Let her go first," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We can't do this if she's still in danger." "No deal." Vaughn's grip tightened, the barrel digging into her temple. "He comes first, then I let her go." The woman whimpered, her eyes darting to mine. She wasn't just afraid. She looked like she was pleading for me to figure something out, to stop this before it spiraled further. My earpiece buzzed faintly. "Hold him off, Daniels. We're bringing the kid in now," the senior officer said, his voice tight. "Why me, Vaughn?" I asked, stalling. "Out of everyone. Why did you ask for me?" He barked a humorless laugh. "You don't even know, do you?" "Know what?" I pressed, stepping closer. The distance between us felt like a chasm, but I couldn't afford to show fear. Every move had to be calculated. He smirked, his lips curling in a way that made my skin crawl. "Your boss? He's the reason my boy got caught up in this mess. That bastard used my son as bait for a bigger fish." I froze. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Could he be telling the truth? I'd heard whispers around the precinct, stories about Vaughn's son being coerced into snitching on a drug ring. It wasn't the kind of thing they'd tell a rookie. The SUV's doors opened, and a boy about 17 stepped out, flanked by 2 officers. He looked pale, his wrists cuffed loosely in front of him. Vaughn's entire demeanor shifted the moment he saw him. His shoulders slumped, and for a second I thought he might drop the gun. Then he barked closer. "I want him here now." The senior officer waved me toward the boy. "Go with him," he said, "but keep your distance." I guided the boy forward, my pulse racing. The air between us and Vaughn was thick with tension, every step feeling heavier than the last. Vaughn's eyes darted between his son and me, his grip on the woman loosening slightly. "Dad," the boy called out, his voice cracking. "Let her go, Vaughn," I said again, this time more firmly. "You've got what you want. Let's end this." Vaughn laughed, bitter and hollow. "You think it's that simple? You think I walk away and everything's fine?" "It can be," I said, my voice softening. "For your son. Don't make him watch this turn into something worse." For a moment, Vaughn hesitated. The gun wavered. His gaze lingered on his son, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Regret, maybe, or resignation. Then everything went to hell. A loud clang echoed through the garage, the sound of a dropped weapon. Vaughn spun toward the noise, his instincts taking over. The woman seized her chance, twisting free from his grip and running toward me. "Stop!" Vaughn roared, his gun swinging wildly. I didn't think. I moved. Grabbing the woman, I pushed her behind me and pulled my weapon. "Drop it, Vaughn!" But he didn't. His eyes locked on his son, who stood frozen in place, fear etched into every line of his face. Vaughn lowered the gun, his hands trembling. "I just wanted him back," he muttered, his voice breaking. "I just wanted to fix it." The negotiator emerged from the shadows, his weapon trained on Vaughn. "It's over," he said sharply. "Drop the gun." Vaughn's gaze flicked to me, then back to his son. "I'm sorry," he whispered, before tossing the gun to the ground. The metallic clatter echoed, and Vaughn sank to his knees, his hands raised. Officers swarmed in, cuffing him as his son cried out, "Dad!" The boy was pulled back toward the SUV, his protest swallowed by the chaos. I stood there, my ears ringing, the weight of the moment crashing over me. Vaughn looked at me as they hauled him away, his face twisted in pain. "You tell your boss," he said, his voice low but firm. "This isn't over." I didn't reply. I couldn't. I watched as they drove him away, the boy's cries still echoing in the parking garage. The senior officer patted my shoulder, murmuring something about a job well done. But I didn't feel relief. Vaughn's words lingered in my mind. I wasn't sure who had really won tonight, or what it had cost us all. The entrance gate groaned as we pushed it open, the rusty metal shrieking into the stillness of the night. Beyond it, the theme park stretched out like the skeleton of a forgotten world. Rides frozen mid-motion, peeling paint, and overgrown weeds clawing through the cracks of the concrete. What had once been a place of joy and laughter was now eerily silent, except for the occasional creak of the Ferris wheel swaying in the breeze. It wasn't my idea to come here, but peer pressure is a powerful thing. "This place is amazing," Darren said, his voice cutting through the quiet. He was the one who convinced us to come, armed with stories of hidden tunnels and rumored treasures. A little creepy, sure, but still cool. I wasn't so sure. Something about the air here felt wrong. Too heavy, like the park was holding its breath. We moved deeper into the park, our flashlights bouncing weak beams of light off forgotten attractions. The carousel loomed ahead, its horses chipped and lifeless, their hollow eyes staring into nothing. A chill ran through me as I passed it, and I could have sworn I heard a faint jingle of music, just a few ghostly notes carried on the wind. But when I stopped to listen, there was nothing. "Don't fall behind," Rachel called, her flashlight trained on the path ahead. "This place is a maze." I picked up my pace, the gravel crunching underfoot. Darren had stopped near a concession stand, examining something in the mud. "Footprints," he said, shining his light over them. The prints were fresh, unmistakable in the damp soil. "Looks like someone's been here recently." Rachel scoffed. "Probably other idiots like us. Let's keep moving." We reached the main plaza, where the Ferris wheel stood like a giant, rusting sentinel. Its seats swayed gently, creaking with each shift of the wind. Nearby, the funhouse gaped open, its clown-faced entrance faded but still unsettling, its mouth wide enough to swallow us whole. Darren grinned and gestured toward it. "You guys up for a little adventure?" Rachel hesitated, her confidence faltering. "I don't know. That place gives me the creeps." I wanted to agree, to suggest we turn back, but Darren was already heading inside. He called over his shoulder, "Come on, don't chicken out now." Reluctantly, we followed. The funhouse smelled of mildew and stale air, its once bright colors muted by years of neglect. Our flashlights flickered as we moved through warped mirrors and tilted floors. The deeper we went, the more the air seemed to press against me, thick and suffocating. "This place is a maze," Rachel muttered, her voice echoing unnervingly. How did kids ever enjoy this? Darren didn't answer. He had gone ahead, his light disappearing around a corner. "Darren!" I called, my voice sharper than I intended. "Relax," he yelled back, his voice distant. "I think I found something." We hurried to catch up, but when we turned the corner, Darren wasn't there. His flashlight lay on the ground, Its beam pointed at a wall scrawled with something in dark, smeared streaks. At first, I thought it was graffiti, but as I stepped closer, the shapes became words. Get out. Rachel grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Where's Darren? She whispered, her bravado gone. I shined my flashlight further down the hall, its beam flickering like it didn't want to see what lay ahead. A faint sound reached us, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the funhouse. They weren't Darren's. They were heavier, dragging slightly like whoever or whatever was making them didn't want to be noticed. We need to leave, I said, my voice trembling. Rachel nodded, and we turned back the way we came, but the tilted corridors all looked the same now. Every turn brought us back to the same warped mirrors, the same faded murals of laughing clowns. The exit was gone. Rachel panicked, her flashlight darting wildly. We just came this way. I swear we came this way. Her voice cracked, echoing unnaturally through the funhouse. Calm down, I said, though I didn't believe my own words. The air was too still, too heavy, and the footsteps were getting louder, closer. I kept my light fixed ahead, my grip on the flashlight slick with sweat. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved at the end of the hallway. Not Darren, but something taller, its shape wrong. It didn't walk so much as it glided, like the darkness itself had come alive. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, as the figure stopped and tilted its head toward us. Rachel grabbed my arm. Run! We sprinted blindly, our footsteps echoing like thunder in the narrow halls. Every turn seemed to lead us deeper, the walls closing in, the air suffocating. My legs burned, my lungs screamed for air, but I couldn't stop. Not with that thing behind us. Finally, we burst through a door and stumbled outside, collapsing onto the damp ground. The funhouse loomed behind us, its gaping clown mouth now darker than ever. The Ferris wheel still creaked in the distance, but the park was otherwise silent, as if nothing had happened. Rachel sobbed quietly, clutching her knees. "Where's Darren?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I couldn't go back inside. Not for anything. Not for him. The drive home was silent. The kind of silence that clings to you long after the event. Rachel stared out the window, her face pale, while I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. We never spoke about what happened. Not to each other, not to anyone. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint creak of metal outside my window, like the sway of the Ferris wheel, calling me back. And I wonder if Darren ever left that place, or if it decided to keep him. Don't forget to subscribe. You are the best.